Welcome to Coffee with the Candidates, Round 2, The Road to the General. This second portion of the program will feature candidates vying for public offices in the Guam legislature, the Attorney General's seat, congressional delegate, and the top seats of Governor and Lieutenant Governor of Guam. This episode will feature two candidates that will want your vote for their first time to sit as the island's non-voting delegate to Congress. It's a special congressional candidate episode after this quick break.
Hafa and welcome to Coffee with the Candidates. I'm Jeff Marchessault, and immediately to my left, she almost needs no introduction. It's Doris Flores Brooks, last served as our island's public auditor for the last 18 years. Say hello.
Hafa, and I want to thank Sorensen Media for the opportunity to be here and to speak about why I'm running for Congress.
Doris, when I'm looking at, I guess you could call this your resume. This is a brilliantly put together brochure. It sort of encapsulates your platform in a very easy to digest list of priorities, 10 priorities. And what I'm seeing here is a lot of critical housekeeping. You're sort of picking up where someone else left off for the last 16 years. And what I also see is a concentration on unfunded mandates. It seems like Guam has to swallow whole all of these federal requirements while not getting the reimbursement that we need in order to sustain and grow our economy. What's the most important issue here for you?
Well, first of all, Jeff, let me just say this. That is the reason why I am running. The unfunded and underfunded mandates that I saw as public auditor, they have really taken this toll on GovGuam's revenues. EITC, Medicare reimbursement, just to name a few. And that's the reason why I'm running. And let me just also add about this. Yes, if I go in, I will be a freshman senator. But more importantly, I'm coming into a Republican administration. I'm going to have access to Republican officials in the administration. I've already started the discussion with Interior officials about compact aid. And what Secretary Zinke said, hey, if we can resolve things administratively, it's better than if we have to go through congressional legislation to do so. So I have that advantage of being a Republican in a Republican administration for the next 2 years.
As they say in Congress, relationships are very important. And if you know Mr. Zinke over at Department of Interior, that's a good start. But as we all know, when you go into Congress representing either the CNMI or Guam, the CNMI, you're a resident representative. Here, you're a non-voting delegate. How will you use those relationships that you're already building and having been a member for a long time of the Republican Party to leverage Guam's impact and influence, even at the committee and subcommittee level?
Well, you know, there's one area, one untapped resource that we haven't mustered, and that's Guamanians living in the States. They say there are more Guamanians living in the States than they are on Guam. And we need to muster that. You know, you cannot give an email to a congressional delegate without you being in that same congressional district's post office zip code. You have to be there to get acknowledged. And we need to muster all of those people by area, you know, like San Diego, Las Vegas, many pockets where a lot of Chamorros are known, and have them start, you know, get them on a database. And when there's legislation supporting Guam, hey, I'm from Guam, but I vote in your district. Please vote this because my heart is from Guam, but I live here in the U.S. We need to muster those Guamanians living in the States. You know. And so that's, you know, with data now, you know, data is the currency of the realm. We need to be able to harness those Guamanians, whether it be Chamorros, Filipinos, any Asians, anyone who has affiliation to Guam. And you often hear when someone dies, we have obituaries that they lived here, worked in Guam for 10 years. Boy, they give a little story about that. We need to do the same thing to tell our story to those Guamanians living in the States, to say to your congressman, to your senator, hey, this is for Guam, I vote in your district, please. And Congress will take notice of that if we can muster all of those people.
Yeah, it's interesting how digital data has shortened the leash of that coconut telegraph. It takes us all the way across the United States. You were mentioning pockets, even Virginia is a big hangout, a big settling place for
right in the heart. I just met someone last week who'd been living in Maryland. We need to find all of those people and get them behind us, supporting legislation, sending them information, what's happening, and asking them to speak on behalf, to email their congressman or congresswoman and say, hey, support this because this is for Guam. I vote in your district. It makes a difference for me.
These compacts of free association with the likes of the Marshall Islands, Palau, and Chuuk, and one of the reasons FAS, Freely Associated States. One of the reasons that it's so controversial is that many on Guam who call the island home feel like we're absorbing too much of the impact and we're paying out too much and not getting enough reimbursement from the federal government. The other argument is that it could be a misreading of what those COFA agreements say. I hear in the news a lot of publicly elected officials complaining about reimbursement, but there is other language that may or may not be more specific in the COFA agreements, and it talks about offsets, and we can talk about offsets for the EITC, or we can talk about offsets in general, but can you distinguish between those two different words and why it's important to be able to distinguish in order to standardize the way that we process the information and present it to the GAO?
The challenge right now with compact reimbursement and why the funding has stayed the same, because GAO has written several audit reports on that matter. The latest, though, is already 5 years old. That was in 2013. And they gave Department of the Interior the same recommendation. The recommendation is to come up with guidelines, as to how to calculate compact impact, because the three major jurisdictions of Hawaii, Guam, and the CNMI all calculated differently. And what GAO said in the report was that it didn't take into account some of the benefits, what you were talking, because it's not all cost. There are some benefits of having COFA migrants here. And so all of that needs to be balanced. And you know, that's right up my alley. In fact, I've already started discussion with the Interior officials when they were here as to why haven't you come up with the guidelines. And what they said, there was some pushback because they didn't want just to have Hawaii do it. We wanted to make this a bilateral agreement, bringing in Hawaii, Guam, and the CNMI, bringing in the respective universities to help calculate that. This is not, this is a simple task in the sense that it's a methodology, what is reasonable, how to calculate. That's right off my line as a CPA, as an auditor. And we will work with the three jurisdictions to come together to, in fact, I've already asked Dr. Chris at the University of Guam, I mentioned it to him, and he's all gone forward to be part of that task force, so to speak, to come up with the guidelines. I think once we have the appropriate methodology that is acceptable to GAO, and I'll be there to make sure it's guiding all along, once we have that acceptable methodology and taking into account the offsets, then we can come up with the true cost of what the compacts of free association do cost the respective jurisdictions. And from there, we're in a better position to say, hey, this is the true cost now, and GAO agrees with those costs.
As Assistant Affairs Director for the Interior, Insular Affairs, former Insular Affairs Director Tony Babauta recently reminded us, he said that he was at a meeting of Pacific Island heads of state and governors back in 2012, and that this issue has not been resolved ever since then.
That's right.
So I'm wondering what's taken so long and how you see yourself as a catalyst for change to make sure that this implementation happens sooner rather than later.
Well, as I mentioned, I've already started the discussion, and I asked I asked Nick Pula, why haven't you done it? This is already 5 years old. Why haven't you done the guidelines? And again, it was pushed back. You need to be constantly in your face to remind them of what needs to be done. Just like anything else, out of sight, out of mind, you need to constantly remind them. And I'm going to be there because I see this, in my own opinion, an easy fix. I don't see this being prolonged. It's just a matter, I see this being done within a year's time. Let's get together, who from University of Hawaii, who from University of Guam, who from CNMI, to come up with this methodology and put time frames. Let's set deadlines, because when we don't set deadlines, it can take forever.
I hate deadlines. We got to wrap this up real quick, but if you can just tell us very briefly how you can use the experience that you've had over the last 18 years as public auditor, having to work across party lines, how those skills are going to help you in achieving overcoming differences when it comes to standardizing issues like COFA.
Well, anything you do, even as an auditor, requires cooperation and collaboration. Even in our audits, for example, the auditee doesn't always agree with it, but at the end of the day, we have to point out, this is why this is happening, this is why this is. When people know the reason why, they're more accepting of it, and it's going to be my role to ensure Congress, the administration, know why things are happening the way they had, to talk to them, to reach across the aisle, because as an auditor, you're always reaching across the aisle. No legislation can pass without without bipartisan support. Every legislation needs bipartisan support. I worked for Governor Ricky Bordallo as a Democrat. I worked for Jesus Leon Guerrero. We all need to work cooperatively and together to get things done. When there is cooperation together, more things can happen.
Republican candidate for Congress, Doris Flores Brooks, thank you so much for being here. We've got to pause for a break. We'll be back on the other side. And we're back on Coffee with the Candidates. I'm Jeff Marchessault, and of course we're here with Senator Michael San Nicolas, who is running for Congress for the first time, and he got past the primary. He actually is the Democratic nominee going into the general election. I've done a mid-show garment change here. I've taken a page out of the book of Cher Bono, my childhood crush. I hope you don't mind.
Oh no, take whatever you want from there.
You're looking very dapper today, by the way.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Hey, listen, we're going to stay very topical, Senator. We know that you're taking this role very seriously, and it seems like over the progression of your career, it hasn't even been a very long career in the legislature, you haven't been shy about taking on bold issues. So I don't mind cutting straight to the chase when I ask you. There is a current sort of very controversial topic that we broke on PNC News, one of our sister P&Ls here at Sorensen Media Group. And the story is that the director's office in Washington, D.C. for Guam has been shut down. Not only has it been shut down, but Margaret Metcalf continues to receive a salary at over $102,000, including benefits. And our questions have been, while she's living in San Jose, how is she keeping the best interests of the Guam public in mind, in heart, and what is she doing in the absence of her residency as well as regular reports? When we interviewed Doris Flores Brooks recently, your opponent, your Republican opponent in the congressional race, she said that it should be a hand-in-glove type of relationship, but she also admitted that she hadn't spoken to Margaret Metcalf recently. We're interested in knowing how you see that relationship working going forward.
Well, I view it as having a clear understanding of the separation of powers and how the branches of government work. The congressional delegate is actually a legislative representative for the people of Guam in the U.S. House of Representatives. But the governor has connections to the administration, and those administrative connections, regardless of who's in office or who's in power, the administrations work with administrations. And so having an administrative representative on behalf of the governor can definitely help move things through agencies, and having the delegate working with that individual can definitely move things through for the people of Guam. So I'm very open to working with whomever the next governor places in that position. But I do agree that both the congressional office and the Washington office of the governor needs to be very transparent with what we're doing for the people of Guam. And we very much intend to do that using our social media channels, reaching out to local media, and just communicating more clearly with the people of Guam.
Recently at the Chamber of Commerce meeting, you kind of threw a zinger over our heads when you said that you come from a finance background. You worked for the Bank of Guam for a number of years, have a lot of education and background in finance. And you said finance looks to the future. And the undertone there was, of course, that you were referring to your Republican opponent and her background as an auditor who looks back rather than looking to the future. Can you clarify what you meant?
Well, it's more of a, as we do our professions in our daily lives, whether it's in media, whether you're a teacher or a nurse, a doctor, a police officer, the way you practice your profession kind of creates a thought process and a pattern for how you approach situations. And so it wasn't necessarily a zinger, it was more so what I would consider a statement of fact, and that is that, with a finance background and with the finance training and the licenses that I've had, and the work that we needed to do for clients, it was very future-oriented. It was evaluating what our current circumstances were, trying to figure out where we wanted to go and how we're going to get there. Accounting is a great profession, and it has its place, and one of the most powerful tools an accountant can use is the tool to be able to look at where you're at and look at where you've been, and that's what accountants do very well. That's what auditors do very well. It's one of the reasons why Mrs. Brooks was a great auditor. But whether or not that translates well into policy making and driving change for the future, I would beg to differ. And you can kind of see it in the way we approach our messaging. A lot of my campaign is focusing on how we can get things done. A lot of her campaign is focused on what's going wrong. And I really feel like Congresswoman Berdalio and Delegate Dr. Underwood have done a very good job already of kind of capturing what the problems are. We don't need to spend more time capturing what the problems are. We need to spend time fixing them. And that's what, that's what finance professionals do. We fix the problems that are encountered by our clients. We've applied the same kind of methodologies in my work as a senator, and we're going to do it as your congressman.
Okay, if I'm understanding the different messages between your two campaigns appropriately, what I'm hearing from Doris Flores Brooks is that she is going to take the existing problems and she is going to pick up where Congresswoman Berdalio left off. You sound like you are willing to and more interested in breaking new ground. Can you explain where you're going to hit the ground running and break new ground within, say, your first 100 days in Washington?
Congresswoman Berdalio has done a fantastic job. We're hoping that we can get a good transition going so that when we go out there, she hands off her work, her contacts, her networks. That'll really get us off the ground from the get-go. And I'm very confident that as a stateswoman, she's going to definitely do that for Guam. Having handed over all those contacts and networks, we want to definitely leverage those to be able to continue moving forward our issues on a relationship basis within Washington, D.C. But what we want to do is we want to take our Guam issues beyond Washington, D.C. and into the American heartland. We want to be able to tell the story of how our veterans are the least compensated here on Guam, although we have the highest recruitment rates. That's a message that will resonate to every veteran across America. We want to reach out to all the disability communities throughout the United States and talk about how our people here on Guam aren't able to get the same kind of supplemental security income support for disabilities the way they are able to in the States. And I think everyone with disabilities will be able to resonate with that because they'll say, that's very, very un-American. And we can go to all the different communities. We can go to all the veteran organizations throughout the country. We can go to all the different disability organizations throughout the country. And then we can take that and circle back around into the caucuses back in Washington, D.C. Because in Washington, D.C., there are caucuses, bipartisan caucuses that are issues focused. My son has autism, and in D.C. they have an autism caucus, bipartisan, 130 members. Get in there, speak to the issues, help them drive their agenda forward, and then say, hey, by the way, can you help us also with some of the inequities we have here in Guam specific to this issue? That's how we can tie it all together. Congresswoman Berdalio has built up strong relationships. We want to tie in those relationships with taking our message to the American people, winning over the constituencies of the various members of Congress, and then working through the caucuses to get our issues resolved.
I spoke to a congressional insider during the last election, and the comment, quite honestly, was that Michael San Nicolas is in for a rude awakening when he gets into Washington, D.C., because he is an idealist, and the people there are pretty rough and tumble. They're wearing brass knuckles and they're fighting for every inch of ground that they can. You have admitted that what happens here on Guam, even when it gets bare knuckled in the legislature, is on a much smaller scale. But if I may, you seem to be taking a page from former Governor Carl Gutierrez, because the unique aspect of his governance is that he's so unreasonable. He does not see no, he doesn't see stop signs. When it comes to self-control, yes, but when it comes to finding a way to get us to the top of the mountain, he does so. Would you characterize yourself like that in that regard? And how do you respond to the assertion that you're too young to handle this and you don't have enough experience?
Well, you know, I think the people of Guam would be the ones to decide that. We've been very, very transparent with our work. I am one of the most, transparent senators when it comes to putting our issues out there. You can message me any day on social media, and we don't shy away from the tough stances. If it's something that we don't think should be done, we don't do it. And if it's something worth fighting for, we fight for it. And the people of Guam can trust us to do that. They know that that's how we work. That's how we're going to work in Washington, D.C. As to whether or not we're going to have a rude awakening, I always regard the challenges that I go through today as a senator, because we've faced many challenges. I remember getting shouted at in public hearing rooms over pay raises. I've had countless press releases, and I'm sure you've seen them cross the wires, just attacking me all the time. And being a very spiritual person, as much as I would like to be able to have more fluidity in being able to move things forward, the Lord gives us obstacles to strengthen us and to make us ready for the rude awakenings to come. And that's why he puts us through these trials and tribulations, to make sure that when we go on to that next step that he set, that we're ready. And I believe that a lot of the challenges that we face here in Guam, as much as it's put the gray hairs on me, I think those gray hairs are going to help me, proverbially get some mileage out in Washington, D.C. So if it's going to be a rude awakening, then let it come. But we will handle it the same way that we've handled ourselves here, with dignity and poise, and we will take what we have given to us and move forward the issues that we have to do.
The comeback quote during our election coverage that was stated in a very public way on your behalf is that this gives Michael San Nicolas a wider platform to express some of what's wrong with issues on Guam and what needs to be improved between the federal government and the local government here in the territory. And I'm curious to know how your thought process is going to leverage the power in Washington on Guam's behalf. And we got 2 minutes to wrap this up. I apologize for the time constraints.
Well, the ability for us to get things done in Washington, D.C. is going to focus entirely on knowing how to segment the issues between administrative and legislative, and then having a plan of action. That's what clearly separates the two choices for congressional delegate here on Guam. Who has a plan of action to actually move things forward? You can't just say, I'm going to introduce a bill to do that, or I'm going to talk to so-and-so and hopefully they can become aware and move it forward. We need to know, okay, if it's not going to happen on option A, then what's option B and what's option C? We have developed a methodology to be able to move policy forward. It's why I was able to pass over 30 public laws in spite of all of the challenges. You got to just make sure your research base and your intents and you're always based on merit, so that when people hear you speak, they trust it's coming out of your mouth. And that's basically how we're going to do it in Washington, D.C. That's how we're going to be constructed.
Do you see yourself building a stronger bloc among insular areas that are represented on the House floor?
I think we're going to find friends wherever we can absolutely find them. At the same time, too, we're going to try and find new relationships that probably haven't been tapped into as much.
Knocking on new doors.
Absolutely.
Okay. Hey, thank you so much for joining us here on Coffee with the Candidates. I'm here with Senator Michael San Nicolas, and he is running for congressional representative in the lower house of the legislature in Washington, D.C. He's running on the Democratic ticket. Thank you so much for joining us on Coffee with the Candidates.